Hello, I'm Naoto, and in this video I'm going to talk about layering different buffers in Hydra. So one thing I might have already tried in previous videos, but what happens with working with a single buffer is you can add things like last time I talked about modulate. Let's say I do oscillate. Oops. And you can do all sorts of things by chaining like parallel. And you can build up textures, but what you would notice is that it's really uniform in the image. I mean, you can also start with the shape and multiply the gradient and such. But it's a bit monotonous, and it's nice if you can work with layers. So let's see. Let me just start with oscillator with default parameters, and there is this function called layer, which takes another buffer, another source. So let's say if I do the same but rotate 0.2, and this is not particularly interesting because we're just seeing what's inside the layer. And for example, if you work with like blend, it's easier because you see that this oscillator and the one inside here with rotated oscillator are blended. Or you can do add div. You can create interesting patterns, but what happens with layer is that you just see what's on top. And this is because oscillator is always returning the texture that has alpha value uniformly 1, which means that it's not transparent at all. This is like very similar to, for example, Photoshop or Illustrator. If you use this layering function in these editors or GIMP, what you notice is that if you have a solid layer on top of something else, like a background, then you won't see the background at all. So we have to add transparency by, for example, using Luma. And now what's happening is that, let's go back to this texture. This is what you get with Luma. It's a bit similar to threshold. But Luma is, in this case you don't see it, but okay, let me check this. So with Luma you see that what's in the background before the layer, but if you do thresh, then you won't see it, because threshold is something that returns another non-transparent opaque buffer with black and white colors, or actually it's interpolated. So if you do 0.5, 0.1, then you would end up with a bit blurrier texture. But anyways, what's happened with thresh is this black part is actually black with alpha 100%. But if you take Luma, it actually preserves the color. Something small. It preserves the original color. So for example, if you color it, then you see that the color is still there, but the luminance below 0.5 will be trimmed. Well, in case actually it's 0.49. Below that it will be trimmed and it becomes a transparent color. So for example, if you change this to colorize the background oscillator, then you see that both are colored. Or if you take the color out from this, then you see the foreground has this oscillator and the background has this colored oscillator. So this is the basic thing about Luma, and there are different ways actually to make transparency. For example, you can actually easily do it with R, which is very blurry. Maybe this is a little bit complicated to explain, but what R does is it takes the red channel of the source and replaces green, blue, and alpha channel with the value of the red channel, and so that it ends up with the black part of the texture being 0 transparency. Or you can actually, I said thresh is not going to work in this case, but if you have a solid layer that has, let me just new line, you mask it with this texture, then you have a similar effect as Luma, because this texture becomes a mask. So this was inside mask, and that will, it becomes like a, how to say, like make a silhouette or stencil of this solid. So if you say like gradient, it's maybe easier to understand. So now you have the gradient color in here in the whole texture, and this mask crops the image with the bright part of what's inside mask. And there are, I just showed you different ways to trim, but they actually behave slightly different, so they're not interchangeable, and depending on what you want to see, you should try different parameters. For example, I just put naively maybe a bit blurry square. Well, because of the aspect ratio it's not square, but a rectangle, let's say. So the first idea, Luma, would, it's okay, it makes a texture on top of the oscillator, but I don't really like it because it's a bit gray. You see that it's not just the alpha, but the original color of the shape. So you see that in this image it's just grayscale without alpha, because I just put shape into out, and this transition part has like colors between white and black, and if you use Luma, that part of the color won't be affected, so it has alpha plus gray texture, and this is sometimes not really ideal. So I would do, well, I think the easiest way is to do R, so that the red channel of this color is, the shape is preserved, and that replaces alpha channel as well. Or you can do again a solid one and mask with this shape. I think it's the same result, but it's handy if you want to use again like gradient. Then it's nicer than doing multiplying with Luma, for example. Yeah, again with Luma you see a bit of darkish border, which if you like this effect, then this is what you want, but if you don't like it, then you should go for mask. And you can always tweak these parameters. This square is a little bit too blurry, so maybe I go for something like this. The size is like roughly half of the canvas, and this is like the fall off. So if you have smaller value, you have sharper edge, and if you have bigger value, you have blurrier edge. But let's say something like this. Or I would like to have another layer, and maybe this oscillator is a bit distracting, so, or maybe even smaller color shift. Yeah, let's keep it like this, or let's just do it like this. And what I wanted to show you is, so you can do layer and another layer here, for example, with shape. So this is going to be like a bit more like circle-ish, and well, you can put something on top of it, but also you can put this layer inside layer. So this becomes a bit tricky, but this is more like a grouping of layers in illustration or photo editing software. And there are slight differences because, for example, if you want to, rotate wouldn't be obvious with this, but if I rotate the whole thing, in this case, both layers are rotated because I'm adding this with this gradient thing with the layer of triangle shape and rotating. But for example, if you have this layer after this, I need to make it a bit tidier, and then if I rotate, so what happens if I put it here? It actually rotates the whole thing because I put it at the very end, so actually the background oscillator is also rotated. But if I put it here, then now only the triangle is rotated. And if I put it here, the triangle is not rotated. Well, actually, one is not really obvious because the triangle looks, the side looks parallel to it. But anyways, if you put it here, then only the gradient part is rotated. This is what happens if you put it at the very end. And again, if I put this layer inside a layer, and if I rotate this whole layer of gradient plus triangle, then you see only these two layers rotating together. At a glance, it's really hard to understand, and I even get confused when I live code. But it's good to know that you can have different types of layers, layer on top of each other, or group the layers. And if you add like scroll or rotate, you would see which parts are connected and which layers are not. Okay, so I think I'm gonna go to another example, and I would go back to my favorite palette like this, which always breaks my green screen, and layer with, let's say I use another oscillator and mask with a shape. Oops. Okay, so this is something I did already, so I don't have to explain it, but also you can do something with noise. And this is a little bit strange. I would say this is a bit ugly because what happens is noise is returning not 0 to 1 like shape or oscillator, but noise returns color from -1 to 1, and that's why there are weird things happening. So if I say thresh 0.2, 0.1, then it's a little bit more pleasant, I would say. I think it's nice if I have, I prefer to have sharp edges. This is same as 0.0000001, but it's easier notation, and it's something I actually made a pull request, but in some cases actually you can use 0, but in some environments this will just end up with blank screen, so you always have to do something until the pull request is merged and deployed. But let's say I do this, and what I want to do is let's say I put another layer, not without grouping, and it's okay. Let's say I put the thresh with 1, and well, now you actually don't see the top layer anymore because this has bigger, lower threshold value for the noise brightness or luminance, so it has like fat texture, and that's just hiding this thing. This is smaller, so it's just like hidden, but they are actually layered. And let's say I do, what if I do this? So now it becomes more interesting because this has different palette than the top layer. So the middle layer has grayscale oscillator, and this has colored oscillator. So you see this kind of variation in the texture. Or you can more explicitly do like solid to make it like an edge kind of effect. I don't know if it's pleasant if you make bigger noise value. It's, yeah, I'm not a fan of this, but maybe it works in a higher resolution environment. Or maybe I take this threshold tolerance a little bit bigger, then now it becomes like a blurry effect because this creates, it's technically affecting the smooth step, so it makes like a bit of interpolation between black and white, like the colors around 0.1. Yeah, it makes a nice shadow effect. Maybe the shadow is a bit too harsh, so I would add, oops, 0.7. So this is just affecting the alpha value, and I just decreased the alpha value of this shadow layer so that it becomes a bit softer. So this is nice. Yeah, I like it. And you can always add more layers. So again, the same problem that this has the same color and you don't see what's on top of the fat layer, but I can always scroll it. Let's say, yeah, let's just scroll X. Now it's still not visible. Yeah. Maybe I should add another shadow layer here that has a value in between. Oops, that's not a good notation. And something like this. So what's happening now is I'm just doing the same thing, but with scroll X, so that the top layer is shifted a little bit to the side, and that creates like a bit like a fake 3D effect, and you can just chain them more and more. I don't know how it is, like this, I guess. Yeah, so in this case we have 7 layers in total. One is background and 3 pairs of 2 layers. Yeah, so 2 times 3 layers that has one solid layer and one background smooth shadow kind of effect. And I usually don't like this thing on the edge that has the weird wrapping, so if you don't like it, you can always scale slightly. So we're just like zooming into the middle and virtually crops the artifacts on the edge. And this is getting a bit too much, so you can always okay, let's take out the shadow effects. This is nice. I think this is also, I think it's like a design thing, like a current trend, I would say. If you really want to go crazy with these patterns, you can use array function to chain it programmatically with a reduce. I think I showed you before, but I didn't really explain what it is, and I think this is out of scope for this tutorial, so I wouldn't really say what's happening in this reduce function, but let's just use it. This one is the background and out. And in here, I won't take one of those. And let's say this part is I is going to be iterate from 0 to 9, I guess. So let's say divided by 20, and this one, and again I want to scroll it, which comes, oh, it's really hard to see, and here it also accumulates maybe 100. Let's see what it does. Yeah, this is actually doing what I wanted, but it's a little bit hard to see because the colors look the same. Maybe do this, or maybe enhance it a bit more. Yeah, so maybe this threshold can be a bit bigger to make it a bit blurry. Borders, now you see the borders, so you get the idea that I was piling up these thresholded masks, and each mask or each layer is slightly shifted from the last one, so you have this fake 3D effect. And I think I made an example before that uses the mouse position to affect these scroll parameters, but that's something you can probably find it, or I'll find the link to the sketch and put it in the description. And with this, I think this tutorial is over, but we have enough material to work on feedback loop. So the next one I'm going to talk about feedback. So please subscribe, and and please give me the feedback instance of how you felt about the video, and I'll try to cover the topics that you're interested as well. Okay, thank you very much.